Rubanomics Dialogues. This is a forum that we have created to bring in a dialogue both from experts from India and Africa as we look at a run up towards our Cape Town event from a Rubanomics standpoint. India and Africa are entering a very defining decade, one where innovation, entrepreneurship, and technology can actually reshape not just the economies, but the lives of people living there. Yet the biggest opportunity isn't simply to trade more. It's in fact to build that trusted innovation corridors where ideas, talent, capital, and purpose move freely across the borders. So in this episode, we explore what it takes to create that enduring partnerships between these two dynamic regions, what it would be the role of the governments, startups, academia, industry, and why trust and not just technology will ultimately determine this success. I'm your host, Kartik Nagendraa, and join us as we uncover how India and Africa can co-create solutions for the world's fastest growing markets and the future challenges. I have two eminent guests with me today. I have Tomi Davis, who is the collaborator in chief of TVC Labs and is the president emeritus of African Business Angel Network. Welcome, Tomi.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and other guest is Karan Nagpal. He's the senior director at ID Insight, which works with the governments and the nonprofits in the global south to help them use data and technology to deliver better services to citizens. Welcome, Karan.
Glad to be here, Kartik. Thanks for hosting us.
Thank you. So, Tomi, why don't you quickly give us a peek into the exciting work that you're doing in Africa?
Well, my name's Tomi Davis, and most people call me TD. I'm an African angel investor, board director, and startup advisor. And for the past 2 decades, I've worked with founders, investors, and innovation ecosystems across Africa. I'm the collaborator in chief at TVC Labs, where we help early stage African ventures become stronger and more investable. And I'm the creator of the Poem framework, which we use to assess and support startups. My particular interest in the India Africa relationship is how we move beyond simply exporting capital or technology and instead build trusted partnerships that allow Indian and African entrepreneurs to co create, invest, and scale together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Karan, your introduction, please.
So I work at ID Insight. I have been there for the past 8 years. And we have offices. We have a very large team in India, but we also have very large teams in Senegal, in Kenya, Zambia, done lots of work in other parts, other countries in Africa. And I think that has given me this vantage point of thinking through how does technology and innovation happen in these different countries, what the binding constraints are. And I'm really passionate about finding ways in which these two sort of Africa and India, these large giants, can learn from each other. There is a lot that India has done when it comes to building at population scale through DPIs, and there's a lot that Africa is really doing really well at in terms of solving for resource scarce contexts, last mile delivery that India can learn from. And in an organization like ID Insight, where we work with governments and nonprofits in both these regions, it's really exciting to sort of learn from that innovation, but also try to see what sort of organizations in one part of the world can learn from another. So I'm super excited about this conversation.
Thank you both of you for the introductions. I'm also really excited to have this conversation and to learn what both these countries are doing. So, Tomi, to begin with, my question to you is: trust is often spoken about as the foundation of.
Please call me
TD. Okay.
Makes
So
everybody's life easier. Thank you.
Okay. So TD, trust is often spoken, as the foundation for any partnership, and even in this case of the India-Africa partnership. So beyond the government agreements, what practical actions can businesses take up to build that long-term trust between the innovation ecosystems in both countries?
Well, you see, trust is built by doing small things together repeatedly and delivering what you said you would deliver. Government agreements matter, but you know what? They don't build operating trust between founders, investors, and institutions. Businesses build trust through transparent pilots, shared commercial risk,
Yeah.
clear governance, local partners with real authority, and honest reporting when things aren't working. In early stage investing where I operate, I've learned that trust comes before capital. At TVC Labs and through ABAN, we used mentorship as a form of due diligence, for example. You sit with founders, understand how they think, see how they respond to challenge, and then decide whether capital should follow. Now, to me, that same principle applies to India Africa partnerships.
Yeah.
So, practically speaking, I'd say businesses should start with joint pilots, joint teams, clear milestones, and shared accountability.
Yeah.
Don't begin with a memorandum.
Yeah.
Begin with a problem that both sides genuinely want to solve. Trust is not built by signing agreements, it's built by shared execution. I trust that helps.
Definitely. And I think that's one of the core principles of what we are operating with the Rubanomics Global Forum as well, to see how do we identify these pilots, how do we have joint ownership in what we are driving, and then it should contribute towards, the collective growth and development. So completely resonate with what you say. So Karan, India has also built, a lot of innovation, right? So they've built this globally scalable digital public infrastructure, while Africa is rapidly innovating a lot of their sectors also, right? Be it the fintech, agri-tech, or mobile commerce. So where do you see the biggest opportunities for co-creating solutions rather than simply exploring technology in either geographies?
So I wanted to sort of build on what TD just said, right, about building these shared projects
Yeah,
together with clear milestones. So India has, of course, done a great job building some of this DPI. And of course, it's like with all large-scale technological change, it has had its challenges. We're sort of working through some of those challenges. And so, the thing isn't that or African countries should adopt that, they're solving for something different.
yes,
And so, if you think of, UPI and M-Pesa as two examples of technologies that are, kind of in the same arena, but solving for very different problems. And so really the magic of co-creation will happen when what UPI lacks and M-Pesa has, and
Hmm.
what M-Pesa lacks, UPI has, what can we build something together that solves for all those problems? And I think in India, we also have areas where, sort of which are resource scarce, where mobile infrastructure is weaker, telecom infrastructure is weaker, and I think there's a lot we India can also learn to sort of solve problems together. So from what Africa has done, that will require what TD said.
Yeah,
Creating these joint teams, joint projects, a lot more people to people contact, solving the problem together. And India has this sort of sometimes in this discourse around what India has done, we forget that actually India is 28, 29 states, which are also very diverse. And
yeah,
so while we have created some of this technological architecture that works nationally, actually, solutions take a lot of time and, effort to move from one state to another, even in India.
right,
And that's because different locations want to feel that they are the ones who have contributed to creating that solution. And I think that principle would be very important to bring to any sort of India Africa partnerships, to make sure that both sides feel that they have jointly contributed to the solution and therefore are able to adopt it, scale it, and only then will it actually improve people's lives.
correct. I think the diversity of regions is a very valid point, and it applies both from India's standpoint as well as Africa's standpoint as well, because each of the regions have their own nuances and they have their own contributions and say in the overall national charter which is being built. So TD, so there are two ways of looking at it. One where we have spoken about the success stories, right? Be it the UPI or be
Mhm.
it the M-Pesa from an Africa standpoint. But many collaborations could also fail, right? And they fail probably because the technology is transferred without understanding the local context, right? So how can Indian companies and the African innovators jointly design products that can solve uniquely African challenges while being commercially viable as well? Any examples that you can talk about?
Well, you've just hit the nail on the head there, because the starting point isn't the technology. The starting point is the problem.
Yeah,
In my book, Investment Worthy Startup, I argue that founders must understand the problem, then the people affected, the current alternatives, and the economics of solving it before they get carried away by the product. The poem framework is built around that discipline. Proposition delivered by organization, measured by its economics as it traverses milestones. So Indian companies working with African innovators should therefore begin with field immersion. Spend time with customers.
Yeah.
Understand how payments are made, how trust is established, how distribution works, how regulation is interpreted on the ground,
Mhm.
and what people are already using today. Commercial viability then comes from designing for the real customer,
Yeah.
not the imagined one. In Africa, affordability, reliability, offline access, agent networks, language, trust, and support matter as much as the software.
They-
For me, when I work with my founders, the simple test is this: does the product make money by solving a problem that customers already feel?
Yeah.
I trust that helps.
Absolutely. And I think for startups, that's very important. Otherwise, many times they get carried away to say, okay, we need to create a new category altogether instead of looking at, an existing category where there are still a bunch of problems which have not been solved and the customers are actually experiencing it real time. So I
Okay.
think the poem framework that you've spoken about beautifully captures that and, gives a guideline on how to go about addressing that piece. So Karan, at ID Insider, I'm sure you would do a lot of research and contribute since you work closely with the government from a policy standpoint. So if you could probably remove one policy or regulatory barrier tomorrow, which could actually accelerate the innovation between India and Africa, what would that be? And why would it have the biggest impact according to you?
I'd say visas and work permits. I think TD was just talking about how teams need to work together, immerse, understand the customer. All of that requires people to travel between places. And today we have this setup where we have tourism visas and we have long term employment visas. I think we need a new category of visa, something that allows people to move for a shorter duration, say 3 to 6 months, where you can really embed in the other team's context. So that would be African engineers coming in, immersing in Indian product teams, Indian product managers doing that same thing in Africa. I think through that, they will have the kind of immersion that TD was speaking about. And, I think trust to your first question, right? That's how trust gets built when you
Yes.
create these teams that are working together. This is the friction on both sides. I think India makes it hard for African talent to
Yeah.
relocate to come to India for a short duration and vice versa. So I think both countries would have to work on that. And I think there are examples of this in the past where it's helped and worked. And I think that is what would kickstart this flow of talent between the two geographies, which will, create a way for capital to follow. TD, you had your hand up. So over to
Yeah,
you.
Jay, please go ahead.
Just a slight, you know, consideration which we need to take into account is the fragmentation of India is incomparable to the fragmentation of Africa. Let me explain what I mean by that. If you look at India, yes, there are various states and probably just as many different tribes, cultures, and traditions.
Yeah.
But there's one central control unit in government. Are you with me?
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, yeah.
Yes.
That singular jurisdictional government, okay, cascades governance through the population of over 1 billion people.
True.
If you look on the other side at Africa, you're talking of over 50
Yeah.
parallel jurisdictions.
Mhm.
And though we talk about the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, we're still a long distance from there. So that complexity,
Yeah.
not just of the underlying culture, we have parallels in culture, I mean, we can talk about culture till the cows come home. No, that's not. I'm talking of what affects our commercial life, which
Correct.
are the jurisdictional controls of governance managed through the political imperatives of each of those is what creates the African complexity.
Yeah.
Trust that helps.
Yeah, very rightly said. And I think the current political dynamics globally also isn't making life easier for anyone, and it's just getting more complex day by day. So, my next question, CD, would be so looking beyond trade, how can startups, universities, research institutions, your venture capitalist organizations create a more sustainable India Africa innovation corridor, which can actually continue to thrive over the next decade?
Building a sustainable innovation corridor beyond trade. Well, From where I sit, a sustainable corridor needs five actors working together in this particular instance. You've got the founders, then you've got the universities, then you've got the research institutions, then you've got investors and corporates who I put together, and finally, you've got governments. And it's about enabling rather than controlling the system.
Yeah.
Startups bring urgency. Universities, they bring talent and research. Investors and corporate, well, they bring the capital and the discipline required. The corporates, in addition, bring the market access. Governments, well, they bring the policy stability. Theoretically, this is now the infrastructure. In some, yeah, we know the story on African infrastructure, so let's leave that on the side. It's the principles that I'm talking about here. Because you see, the mistake is to treat these as separate conversations. They need to operate as one system. That's why I like the word corridor.
Yeah.
But I would define it carefully. People think, once you say corridors, they're thinking of moving goods.
Mm.
But the most valuable corridors, they move knowledge, they move trust, talent, and capital. Then goods, yeah, the goods follow.
Yes.
A practical model will include joint venture studios, student exchange around entrepreneurship, investor syndication platforms, founder market entry clinics, and sector pilots. Okay, in agriculture, in fintech, health, climate, and education. The corridor, as I see it, should also build founders who are investment worthy, not merely visible. Visibility without readiness, it wastes everybody's time.
Yeah.
Look, at TVC Labs, my work is to find, fund, and follow founders using mentor led capital. That journey for me is deliberate. Learn, refine, verify, mentor, invest. The India Africa corridor needs the same discipline, but at institutional scale. Because you see, a corridor becomes sustainable when it has repeatable mechanisms, not just relationships. I trust
Right.
that helps.
Right. Absolutely. Karan, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, a few specific ideas I'd say to build on what TD was saying. One is joint education programs where IITs and IIMs could form these joint programs with the African technical universities, engineering colleges, business schools. I think that creates a cohort of people with that dual context and also solves for the problems we were talking about earlier in terms of building trust, immersion in each other's context. That's one. I think the second would be this sharing of information and deal flow between investors in Africa and investors in India. I think, if I'm not wrong, TD, correct me if I'm wrong, but there is very little Indian angel or VC investment happening in African companies, and I think finding ways to increase that would be quite useful. But of course, that will be downstream, right? Because first, you'll have to have these people getting to know each other, understanding context, teams working together. So those are some of the specific ideas, exchange, setting up these joint programs, creating more shared deal flow. And, I think that is how these corridors will sustain through people, through knowledge, rather than, through government MOUs, because that's fine. That's okay. That will start us off. But to sustain it, will require this repeated interaction that TD was speaking about.
TD, just as a follow-up question to that, while I agree that all these collaborations across all the five stakeholders that you mentioned collaboratively is what is required, but how do we ensure that these are more centered towards the urban areas and it doesn't just end up being again something which is more suitable from probably the larger cities in both countries? TD, would you like to take that?
Sorry?
So I was saying, just as a follow-up question, while all these collaborations are good and collectively they need to work together, how do we ensure that these are more centered towards solutions which can help from the urban area that we're talking about, and not something which is only probably applicable more from the bigger cities in both countries?
Well, the question of need, okay? It's about aggregating that need and designing appropriately. What you will find is because, especially in the case of startups, and let's not go there. Startups are not the only tools existing in the world, by the way. SMEs are really the
Yeah.
tool and architecture of commercial life. But it's just I focus on startups, but hope she's not around. Look, I have the privilege of being married to a lady who's run two SMEs in two countries for the last 20 years very successfully. Okay. This is in education. She runs schools. okay, in the UK and in Nigeria. So the point being, you're saying how. The
Yeah,
first thing is, if we are looking, it's about like for like problems. Remember, I said problems.
yeah,
So we all know in Africa, we have rural areas. We all know
yeah,
in India, we have rural areas.
yes,
So can we come and say we're designing a solution focused specifically on the rural problem? As an
mm,
example, so ab initio, you've excluded the cities. And anybody involved understands, hang on, that means average cost of living is lower. That means average income is lower. That
yeah,
means disposable income is nearly non-existent. It
yeah,
means our design parameters are totally different. It means our expectation of infrastructure availability is also totally different. It means our concept of government policy, okay, contextually is also different. If we start with that kind of thinking,
mm,
then okay, we can do what I'm talking about. I trust that helps.
yes, absolutely. So my closing question to both of you, 5 years from now, what would success actually look like for this India-Africa corridor, with respect to some tangible outcomes, which should convince us that actually the India-Africa innovation corridor has evolved into a partnership beyond, just at a small scale, but into a more globally recognized innovation ecosystem itself, which probably few of the other developing economies can also look into. So, Karan, maybe you would like to take it first?
Yeah, I would like to start with some very specific and ambitious goals, but I will be very specific. So one is just if India's share of Africa startup investment rises to about 20%, and that's one. Second would be about 20-25 companies having shared India Africa product teams, where they are doing co-development, solving problems together. Three would be some way of doing reducing the cost of cross-border remittances and cross-border sort of capital flows. So, down to the level of the India UAE remittances, So I think that's three. Four would be maybe about 10 programs that are joint education programs between IITs, IIMs, and African tech and business universities. So those are my sort of precise goals. I think another sort of more ambitious goal would be kind of a joint regulatory sandbox where
Mm,
you can try to pilot new innovations together, where regulators approve in one jurisdiction carry some weight in the other jurisdiction. So those would
Together.
be those. If you're there, then that would be like a really good world.
very interesting. TD, yeah, I saw you were very emotive when he spoke about the
Oh,
regulation.
I love the idea of a regulatory API. Sorry, my software background showing, but yeah, that would be amazing. I mean, 5 years, success shouldn't be measured again, please, not by the number of summits held or memoranda signed, forget
Yeah,
that. Okay, let's look for tangible outcomes. I would want to see India Africa co-founded startups raising capital.
yeah,
India and Africa investors syndicating deals together.
correct.
Universities running joint innovation labs.
Yeah,
African founders using adopted DPI style infrastructure. Indian companies entering African markets through local venture partnerships.
yeah,
And African solutions, well, expanding into India or other global South markets. I'd also want to see a trusted pipeline of investment worthy start founders,
yeah,
not pitch theater, real companies with customers, revenue, governance, a measurable impact. For me, the strongest evidence will be this. When a founder in Lagos, Nairobi, Cape Town, or Accra can work with partners in Bangalore, Mumbai, or Delhi,
yeah,
access trusted capital, test across markets, and scale without having to explain why the corridor matters,
yeah,
then the corridors move from concept to infrastructure. Because you see, the corridor succeeds when India and Africa stop admiring each other's potential and really start building companies together.
yeah,
A globally recognized ecosystem would have investable ventures, repeat investors, shared standards, as you were hearing, cross
yeah,
border talent flows, local execution partners, and visible exits too. Don't forget, because
yeah,
until exits happen, we're still
correct.
mostly telling stories.
Yes,
Some stories are useful, but investors prefer receipts.
yes. No, I think that's beautifully summarized. I think I love the bold ambition which Karan that you outlined for what this would look like 5 years from now. And I think from TD's standpoint, mention that these are to be actual tangible outcomes that you're looking at. And somewhere where, in fact, this corridor kind of becomes invisible and the machine is running by itself. And it's a profitable machine. And it is also something which is touching lives where it matters and contributing towards that collective growth. So thank you, TD and Karan, for sharing these valuable insights. This is definitely a starting point for us to have more of these conversations, to bring experts from both sides. And eventually, these conversations should also translate towards action. So thank you once again for your insights. And
Thank you,
it
Kartik,
was
for
really
hosting
nice talking to you.
and for your questions.
Thank you very much for having us. And it was a pleasure, a very interesting conversation.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.